What is going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. Hey, it's time. Lake Fork 2021 Bassmaster Elite Series, Texasfest. If you like tournament bass fishing, it's going to be a special one. Let's preview it. Hey guys, one thing before we get started. Hey, check this out. Every single time these top level tour events come here, you get the Elite Series, you get MLF, whatever it is, the best fishermen in the world show up on Lake Fork. Some of the leaders always end up fishing on some of the spots featured on the Fish Life app. So if you want to see some of the spots that these guys are going to be fishing, be sure you subscribe to the Lake Fork Premium Package on the Fish Life app. We finally made it. It's time for the Bassmaster Elite Series Texasfest from Lake Fork. And man, is it going to be exciting. Hey guys, this is going to be an awesome tournament. I think this tournament should showcase some of the diversity of Lake Fork, which is what we're going to talk to you guys about today. We're going to preview everything. We're going to talk about all the different ways we're probably going to see them catch it later this week. But a general overview of what's going on right now is there's a lot of different ways to catch fish extremely shallow. There's a lot of fish on the bank from top end of the lake to the bottom end. There's several different ways you can go about catching them shallow. We have a little bit of all three faces of the spawn going. We do have a few fish that are post spawn. A lot of the fish, I would say probably the majority of the fish are in the spawning cycle right now and have been around that spawning cycle. We're going to have a few that are still left. They're going to be a little bit more offshore, a little bit more deeper, that are going to still be pre-spawn as well because our water temps are just now in the 60s and they're holding. We've been getting cooler weather. So you've got water temps ranging, this is as of Monday, you got water temps ranging anywhere from 60 to 65, 66 degrees, depending on where you are in the lake. One thing to think about as we watch this tournament is think about what these guys are dealing with going into it. Conditions aren't going to be just perfectly ideal. I mean, listen, it's late April, it's Lake Fork, it's a good time to be here. But we have had an extremely cool year overall. We've had some warm trends, and man, has it gotten good on those warm trends here at Lake Fork. But we've also had a lot of cool trends, and just this week, we're gonna have 35-degree air temps. It was 42 degrees this morning. There's gonna be a lot of cooler weather. Highs are gonna stay in the 60s and 70s. One thing about this time of year is you don't really even need the air temps to be that warm in order to experience warming trends, because when you get this late in the year, the daylight period gets so much longer, the water gets exposed to so much more sunlight on sunny days that even at cooler temps like 70s, 60s, 80s, the water will still warm fairly well because it's exposed to the sunlight for a bigger portion of the day. So the water temps should climb a little bit from right now. Like I said, ranging from 60 to 66 right now. We should see warmer water temps than that as we go into this tournament this weekend. That being said, there's a full moon coming towards the end of the tournament. I kind of wish the tournament was being held as the full moon hits so they can fish the 3 days, 4 days after the full moon. It's not what we're getting. Can't always get everything lined up right. Like I said, it's still late April. It's still Lake Fork. The water should be warm trending somewhat as they get here. The lake's in really, really good condition. The lake is slap full. It's been staying really, really close to full pool. And the clarity is great despite some of the rain that we had here recently. The clarity has stayed phenomenal throughout most of the lake. That you can go find some dirtier water if you really want to look for it, but most of the lake has a most of the lake has great visibility, and especially in some areas on the south end, the visibility is as clear as I've ever seen Lake Fork this time of year in recent memory. So all that taken in, like we say, guys, lots of ways to catch them up shallow. There's going to be several different ways you're going to see these guys excel. One thing about the Elite Series, and I can't stress this enough, these guys are better than us, folks. They're better than all of us. These are the best in the world at what they do. And while Lake Fork has fished very, very good for some lately, it's also been a struggle and a grind for others lately. With this group of guys, you get 80-something, 100, whatever many of these guys there is now, you get them out here on this pond this time of year, you are going to see absolute fireworks. You're going to see some giants get caught every single day of this tournament. You're going to see big bags get caught every single day of this tournament. It's going to be the best tournament of the year, hands down, as far as weights go. So if you have never been a fan of Lake Fork, you don't know much about Lake Fork, watch the Elite Series this week. Be sure you watch the live coverage on Bassmaster.com. And if you're not a fan of Lake Fork right now, you will be by next Sunday, I assure you. Because what swims in this lake is so special. And that's what makes this event so exciting. We've got some of the best fishermen on planet Earth coming at a time of year where most of the fish are on the bank up shallow doing their thing and very accessible. And this happens to be the lake that is the greatest trophy bass lake that has ever existed. That's why we call it the GOAT Lake. There's never been another lake that year after year is more consistent in the number of 7+ pound bass that this place kicks out. I can't even fathom how many 7-pounders we're going to see in 4 days in this event with 80 anglers. It's going to be just mind-boggling, the fish that get caught. Just watch. So let's discuss some of the types of areas, some of the patterns that we're going to see, and also some of the baits we're going to see them using amongst those patterns as well. First of all, general overview, I think there's going to be about 3 patterns that you're really going to see come into play here. Number 1 is going to be spawning fish in the backs of pockets, shallow fish, bank-driven fish. You're going to see guys fishing the bank a lot in this event. Number 2 is going to be staging fish on shallow points, shallow bars, shell beds. Guys, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about shell bed fish. We're talking about shallow, hard spots is really what we're talking about. Clay points with some shell and some gravel mixed in. Get some wind on them, see some bird activity on them. That's what you're going to see. Normally this time of year, I'd be really excited to tell you about a shad spawn. The shad spawn really hasn't gotten going in earnest. There's been a couple signs of it, but it really hasn't gotten really going. Now, that may get started some this week, and you may see some shad spawn on some of these shallow, windy areas. But I don't think it will. Not in a major enough way to affect the tournament in a major way, because the cold temperatures that we talked about before. We're going to have cold temps this week. It's going to keep those water temps cooled down enough to where I don't think the shad are really going to start quite spawning yet. But if it does, the shad spawn bite will be stupid crazy. You guys will want to make sure you're turning in as soon as they go live first thing in the morning, because it'll happen fast. But really those shallow points, man, you don't have to have a shad spawn to feed them, because the shad will still gather up on them as the wind blows into these shallow areas, these shallow hard spots, shallow staging points. And the third pattern is going to be true pre-spawn fishing. It's going to be fish that are suspended in timber, and it's possible, okay, that we might see some guys using the live scope, the active target technologies out there on suspended fish in timber. Now, this to me has the least amount of fish on it. There's the least amount of fish doing this of the 3 patterns. I think the majority of the fish are going to be that we're going to see caught are going to be caught around spawning areas. They're going to be caught shallow, inside pockets, on the bank, around the bank, stuff like that. The second most popular thing I think is going to be the staging fish, the shallow staging fish. I think the least amount of fish on anything is going to be, I think the pattern that's going to hold the least amount of fish is going to be the offshore live scope staging fish in timber that are suspended out there. But this is a 5 fish per day tournament. This is a lake with an abundance of fish in it per acre. You don't have to get a lot of bites in a 5 fish tournament to be successful. And using modern technology, there could be somebody, okay, could be somebody that targets those fish offshore and has success doing it with the forward facing sonars that we've seen so many use. Really my belief in that comes from this. After fishing here over the years and seeing what I've seen the last few years with this new technology, and just knowing the lake the way I know it, I firmly believe there is a heavy population of fish that live most of their life year-round suspended in timber on Lake Fork. Rest in peace, he left us too soon. Mr. Mark Pack passed away earlier this year in January. He was famous way before forward-facing sonar came out for catching fish suspended in trees throughout most of the year. He was extremely good at it before it was even a thing to do. So I really do believe there's a big population of fish that live that way on this lake, and therefore these guys are the best in the world, best technology in the world. Somebody might find that, even though there's not that many fish on that right now. I don't personally believe. Now we'll go ahead and talk about that one first, and as far as how they're going to attack it. Guys, it's going to be pretty simple. Those guys are going to have a couple things that they can use. They're not allowed to use Alabama rigs. That's too bad, because that's probably the most effective tool for those suspending timbered fish. But we saw Patrick Walters do it last year. He threw a jerkbait, a shad pattern jerkbait. Now this is a shallow diving one, and which jerkbait they'll use will all depend on how deep they see those fish suspending in that timber. This one out here will dive about, will get down to about 4 foot and suspend, maybe 5 foot depending on the line you're using. And they might use deeper diving jerkbaits that spin at 8 to 10 foot. You also might see them using swim baits on jig heads. Swim baits on top hook jig heads, or potentially even a glide bait or hard jointed type of swim bait might come into play. But really, the two tools I think you'll see guys use if they're targeting forward facing sonar fish suspended in the timber, you're gonna see them use a swim bait and a jerk bait. I think that's the two best things they can catch them on out there. All right, so let's transition over to the staging fish, the shallow point fish, the wind. These guys are gonna need wind. If they have a day in the tournament where the wind doesn't blow, this bite is not gonna be nearly as good. So if these guys are, if you remember back to the Brandon Cobb tournament in May of 2019, I believe it was, he won that tournament catching most of his fish on these shallow wind-blown staging areas. But if you don't have wind, to be fair, it was a full-on shad spawn when he was here in May. We're kind of a little bit before that. So here in a minute when I talk about the spawning areas, I think this is where the tournament's really going to happen, is in the spawning areas. But we'll see. But if you remember that tournament with Brandon Cobb in May, hey, he caught so many of his fish again on a jerk bait, just like this one right here. A shad pattern, a little shallow diving jerk bait, throwing it on these shallow wind-blown points. Man, this jerkbait is proven to be a tremendous tool on this lake year-round. It's proven to be effective, especially when those shad get up on those points. And even if the shad spawn isn't quite happening, those shad are still present on those points, and you'll see some guys catching fish on a jerkbait on that pattern. The other two tools that for me are working really good on those shallow points is going to be a Carolina rig, just a creature bait or a lizard. I'm using the Hog Walla from 6 Cents. By the way, this jerkbait that I just showed you guys, if you like that one, that's a 6 Cents Provoke 106X. This is a 6 Cents Hog Walla. The majority of the baits that I'm going to show you today are going to be 6 Cents baits. If you like any of these baits and you want to get some for yourself, you can go order them at 6centsfishing.com, which is linked in the description. Okay, and when you do order something from there, punch in the code Your Lake Fork Guide. You'll get a 10% discount on all orders. So back to the baits. Carolina rig and a Hog Walla creature bait on those shallow points when the wind's blowing, especially when it gets a little tougher like it is now, when there's not as many fish on those staging points and they're not wanting to bite as good. Having a bait like that you can keep in their face longer can be really effective. So we might see some guys dragging an old ball and chain on a shallow point throwing a creature bait. Then the other thing that Lake Fork is kind of famous for, and I think that we'll probably see some of this in this tournament, but I don't think the guy that wins it is going to get married to this, and I'm going to tell you why. This technique has become so popular on Lake Fork that these fish see so much of it that I just don't think you can catch enough fish every day to win the tournament solely with a swim bait. Now, if there's ever a professional tournament that's lined up for a big swim bait on Lake Fork, this is the best time of year to do that, guys. This is the tournament that they should be doing it in. I just think there's so many people throwing big swim baits on Lake Fork these days, it's going to be really hard to be consistent for 4 days and get enough bites for 4 days to win the event. But what I'm talking about is big swim baits. This right here is a Smash Tech Felon. It's a line through swim bait. You can see the treble hooks on the bottom. When I say line through, the hook just goes into the belly and the bait actually slides free up and down the line, okay? So great hookup ratio on these fish, great landing ratio on these fish when they bite this line through, because when they bite it, the bait comes off and now they have no leverage to throw the bait. So it's a very effective tool out here for these big fish, especially trying to get control of them and land them around all this timber, because it's a great hookup and landing ratio bait. The advantage of these line throughs is they're completely weightless, they run true, and you can reel them so slow and keep them high enough in the water column over these super shallow wind-blown areas. And we might see some fish get caught on big line throughs, just like that one from Smash Tech right there. We also might see some big fish get caught on hard swim baits that'll stay shallow. You know, a very slow slinking or even a floating glide bait may be a key on some of these shallow points, or even just a hard jointed swim bait that floats or something like that. Something that'll stay shallow, present a big realistic profile, and be efficient on those wind-blown shallow areas. So that's it for the shallow points, guys. They're going to be, to me, I think these guys are going to be throwing swim baits, Carolina rigs, and jerk baits. Might see a square bill bite on those shallow points as well, especially if the shad spawn starts going. The square bill can be super effective, super efficient, and those guys are great with a square bill in their hands. Now let's talk about the shallow water fishing, the backwater fishing, the pockets, the spawning areas. And this is where it gets really, really diverse right now on Lake Fork. There's so many ways to catch fish up shallow and so many different types of things happening. This is where you run into the all three phases of the spawn deal. Because if you go up to the north end of the lake, you can find some grass. Grass is starting to come back this year. It's really starting to kind of grow this year. You can see it growing already in areas and expanding out. And so, yeah, that water can be dirtier. Some of it's dirtier, some of it you can find clean pockets of it. but that healthy grass is there. Also, those fish are the furthest along. You have the most number of post-spawn fish in those areas that are going to be a little more aggressive and hungry. And those fish in those northern areas, they're biting stuff like a frog, like the Vega frog right here from 6th Sense Fishing. I've been catching fish on a frog out here lately. Man, there's a lot of guys on this tour that love throwing a frog, and a frog is absolutely a big fish bait. So we might see a lot of guys up shallow throwing a frog. The other thing they're starting to bite in that dirtier water around that grass is a weedless swim bait. I'm throwing mine on an owner flashy swimmer. This is a 6th Sense whale. I'm using white with all my swim baits in that dirtier water, and really all across the lake I'm using white on my swim baits for the most part. But this is a 6th Sense whale in a white color. I've also been throwing the Smash Tech hollow belly in a white color, but they were biting the hollow belly a lot better before this last cool trend. When we were on a warm trend and the water was climbing, they were biting the hollow belly better. They kind of quit biting that and started biting the regular paddle tail whale. And the reason why is, on that cool trending, I can roll that whale swim bait so much slower. So I don't know whether the hollow belly type swim baits will come into play this week, but some type of swim bait up shallow could be effective as well. And the advantage to those smaller weedless swim baits in those shallow water areas is A, you've got more fish in those areas than you do on the staging points. B, the little bit smaller swim bait, you're gonna get more bites. And even though it will get an absolute giant bite, I mean, the hollow belly that we're talking about is the bait that I had the 13-year-old kid catch a 12-pounder on a few years ago. Like, you do get giant bites on those smaller swim baits, but you'll also get numbers of bites. You'll get a lot more bites, so it allows a guy to throw it for 4 days and be consistent enough to win the tournament potentially. And then kind of the last thing in the dirtier water areas is a darker colored Senko style plastic. So just a stick bait, wacky rigged. This is a real dark green pumpkin with all kinds of colors. I have this color custom made, but it's got different colors flake in it. But it's just a real dark green pumpkin. You know, black and blue, but just the dark colors in that dirty water where those fish are post spawn. If you get that Senko, that frog, and that swim bait around a fry garter, they're going to bite it. Most of the time, most of these fry garters, especially that dirty water where they can't see you coming, they're going to bite that bait. So you might see some guys doing that. Now, like I said, the shallow water presents a lot of diversity. There's also going to be a ton of sight fishing done in this event. Sight fishing is a very effective tool in a 5-fish tournament. The reason it is because you can pass over all the fish you see until you get the one that you feel like you need. Guys might not even stop on one unless it's over 5 pounds at times in this tournament, right? Or maybe bigger than that at times. So sight fishing is so effective because you don't have to, every time you're fishing for a fish, you know it's one that you need in your best 5. You know, there's a lot of areas that you can sight fish in this lake. You can sight fish pretty far up north. The water is clear enough. There's still enough spawning fish to sight fish pretty far north. Areas like Glade, areas like Birch, Pinson, Board Tree. You know, there's areas that you can still sight fish in right now pretty far up north on the lake. But really, I think the majority of the sight fishing we're going to see is going to be done in areas like Little Caney, down towards the south end of the lake. One thing about Little Caney, I think you'll see a lot of it in this event because Little Caney is a big creek arm. It has a huge population of fish that use it. And there's all kinds, there's just tons and tons of small little corners and pockets that really big fish like to spawn in around the inside and outside of the mouth of Little Caney. There's just all these little cuts, and man, they've got great bottom content. There's a lot of dynamic structure that holds fish throughout the year out in front of them, and just tons and tons of big fish spawn in these areas every single year, and they're doing it right now. You know, when we get in there and we talk about sight fishing, the baits really aren't going to be the big deal. It's not going to be about what bait. It's going to be about that guy reading that fish's behavior. You'll see, you know, who knows whatever brand bait they're going to be throwing, whatever color they might be throwing. Some guys will throw white, some guys won't. I don't like throwing white. I like to throw natural and feel the fish bite my bait. These guys, probably someone will throw white because they're good enough. They can get a quick set on a fish when they see it bite it without making a mistake. So I choose to go away from the white because I have a lot of customers that swing too early when they see the fish nose down on a bait. I also do think on Lake Fork you tend to get bedfish to bite a little easier with natural colors, especially if they have red in them. I like to throw a watermelon red flake bait. I also put a red bead on my bait as well. But you'll see a lot of guys sight fishing it with a lot of different baits, but one thing they'll all have in common, mark my words on this, if a guy is sight fishing for a bedfish, you'll see 2 different tools. You'll see some type of weightless plastic, maybe some type of weightless plastic, a wacky worm, a fluke, something like that. But what you'll see most of the time will be a Texas rig with a short, compact creature bait. It won't be a long lizard, it won't be a worm, it'll be a short, compact creature bait, similar to the stroker crawl from 6th Sense Fishing. One other thing that you'll notice in the sight fishing, when you're watching these guys bedfish, you're gonna see shoreline cover. The areas that are holding the most bedfish right now really feature some type of flooded cover. It may be pondweed or gator grass. It may be the little pencil reed heads that we have. It may be hydrilla coontail in some areas. There is some of that, like I said, starting to come back. So, but the areas that tend to hold the most numbers of bedfish right now tend to have more stuff in the water. We'll just say junk, just something for them to spawn on. That being said, the water down around the mouth of Little Caney and the south end of the lake in general is so clear this year. The water's clearer than it has been in recent memory. In those areas, a lot of those fish are spawning out in the middle, not next to any type of cover. Like, you'll be looking at the bank and you can see some fish up there bedding, but then if you look out off the bank, kind of where your boat tends to be, you'll see these little black circles. And then if you look at them close enough, you'll see a fish move off of them. And a lot of times those are bigger fish, better quality fish, and they're spawning kind of out in the middle. So don't be surprised if when you're watching guys sight fish, you see some flipping at a bed out off the bank in the middle. If they're doing that, they're down there on the south end of the lake, somewhere around mouth of Little Caney, somewhere around, you know, Dale, Ray, Cheney, you know, just all those creeks and pockets down there. The water's so clear that the fish are able to spawn deeper, and you're able to see them deeper. I think they always spawn deeper. I think sometimes we just can't see them when the water gets too stained, but right now the water is not too stained. It is plenty clear to see those fish way off the bank in deeper water. So as an overall overview, I know I've said that a few times in this video, so I tend to repeat myself. I'm a fishing guide. I'm not an English major, a math major, or anything else. I just like to fish. But as an overall overview, I think this tournament will be one shallow. I think sight fishing, and that's probably my own prejudice coming into play because I sight fish so much because I like to do it so much, but there are so many fish spawning on this lake right now. And with that full moon coming in at the end of this tournament, I really feel like there's going to be some brand new fresh big fish, really big fish, some brand new fresh ones are going to be pulling into these areas. May not be necessarily sight fishing that wins it, but I think it's going to be somebody targeting spawning bass in spawning areas. I don't think that the staging fish is going to win it. I don't think that the offshore suspended active target fish is going to win it. I think somebody throwing a weightless plastic, a swim bait in a spawning area, a frog in a spawning area, or somebody looking at them is what's going to be what wins it. I think that's what you're going to see. The majority of the fish catches are going to come from guys fishing in spawning type of areas. It's a great time of year to fish Lake Fork. There's so many different ways to do it. As you can see from these drone shots, there's all these areas that just look absolutely amazing. There's a lot of, you know, from the clearest clear water sight fishing way out off the bank to the dirty water throwing a frog and flipping. You know, it could be any of those things. It could be any of those things. This tournament is wide open, and because there's so many different options on how to catch them, there's really no way to predict who's going to win, in my opinion. You know, I think that having some local knowledge of where the bigger fish tend to spawn on this lake will help. So the local guys like Lee Livesey, Brad Watley, some of those guys, that's probably going to help them some, guys that have more experience on the lake this time of year, because these guys that aren't from here, that didn't, you know, fish here a lot until they got on tour, they haven't fished here this time of year, because this time of year they're typically somewhere else on tour because their tournament schedules are always full this time of year. Now, it's Lake Fork, and I'm sure there's some exceptions to that rule where some of those guys have been here quite a bit. I know the Shryock brothers have come down here, and one of them is on the Elite Series. The Shryock brothers have come down here in the springtime quite a bit. And I'm sure there's several others, but I do feel like local knowledge could be a bit of an advantage. So look out for Lee. He's been fishing good. Lee Livesey, he was the best guide on this lake till he broke out on the Elite Series, and he didn't really guide here near as much as he used to now. But look out for him in this event. Of course, Patrick Walters just won here last November, which is really, really soon to be coming back to a lake. So he's going to have a lot of confidence when he gets here. He's going to have good mojo. He's going to feel good about things when he gets to Lake Fork. And plus, Patrick Walters has just been on fire this year. So watch out for him. I'll tell you one guy, too, that you need to watch out for is the two returns, Jason Christie and Greg Hackney. You got to watch out for those guys as well, just because they're such good shallow water fishermen. And I really think you might see some of those guys. You might find them in some of that dirtier water doing some of that frogging and flipping, some of that stuff that we've been talking about in that dirtier water up on the northern end where they have more of those post-spawn fish. And, man, that frog, they get that going. Hey, John Cox is going to be a guy to watch out for as well, of course. And Brandon Polinick, who's obviously one of the best fishermen on planet Earth, he just always seems to do really, really good at Lake Fork. It seems to fit his eye well, suit his styles well, whatever you want to call it. But he always seems to have a good event when he comes to Lake Fork. So you can't count him out. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of picks. Stetson Blaylock has a lot of experience on this lake. He's obviously a really good sight fisherman. He's competed for events, sight fishing before, and done really well. Drew Benton is a guy that when they were here in May of 2019, Drew Benton was maybe the only guy in the top 10 that was strictly sight fishing throughout the entire event. And he made a top 10 doing that at a time when they came here that year in May, there wasn't that many fish on beds, and he still made it work. Well, those same areas that Drew Benton fished, and I know where he was fishing because that was the first time the Elite Series was here when I was guiding. And I was on the water the first day of the tournament, first couple days of the tournament, and I was staring at Drew Benton half the day. Like, we kept going to the same pocket, meeting each other. So I know the areas he was fishing in that tournament, sight fishing. Those areas are loaded. Absolutely loaded with bedfish right now. So Drew Benton, if he comes down here and just runs the way he ran before, he'll probably do just fine this week, I would imagine. So those are my predictions. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be the biggest weight of the year as far as 4-day weights go in a Bassmaster Elite Series event. I think you'll see at least 5, maybe more guys over 100 pounds in this event. And the overall record of 130 pounds for 4 days is not out of the question. You never want to predict that because it's the all-time record. I mean, obviously that's really, really difficult to beat. But it theoretically could. If a bunch of these, you know, if we get a good wave of bigger females that pull in preparation for this full moon and these guys figure out how to catch them, I mean, obviously this lake has the potential to take that record down. So we'll see. We shall see. I know one thing. I'm fired up about it. Hopefully you guys are fired up about it. And like I said, stay tuned. Because if you haven't been a fan of Lake Fork before now, watch the live coverage this week and then tell me you're not after Sunday. I bet you won't. Well, all right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Like we said earlier, hey, go check out sixcentfishing.com if you want to see most of the baits that are recommended here today. You can find them there. And anything you order, punch in the code Your Lake Fork Guide, get your 10% discount on all orders. As well as that, hey, if you want to see some of the areas these guys are fishing, because every time they come here, they always end up on the areas that we have marked on the Fish Life app. Be sure you go subscribe to the Fish Life app Lake Fork Premium Package, and you will be able to see some of the best areas of the lake. I update them every month myself, and you'll see some of the areas that these guys are actually catching fish in. It seems like every time one of these events happens here, it never fails. Some of the leaders are fishing areas that are marked on the app. And I'm not trying to imply that they're using the app. What I'm implying is the information on the app is so good that the best fishermen in the world that are fishing the best that week end up on some of those spots. And it happens every time they come here. So check that out. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching as always. And we will see you next time right here on Your Lake Fork Guide.